Welcome, everyone. I am Jean Sullivan, and I'm proudly part of the Arcview team, co-founder of the Arcview Collective Fund. And I am delighted to be here today because this is one of my favorite subjects. I first want to give you a very quick update on the Arcview Group. Now, many of you know us and you've been part of the Arcview community really since it started. You know that that was in 2010, 13 years ago, by Troy Dayton and Steve DeAngelo, two of the just remarkable pioneers. And their mission was to create really first of its kind, much needed safe haven for both investors and entrepreneurs. But they were so troubled by the social equity issue at the core. Why are people getting arrested? And they were appalled, and we remain appalled at the stigma around cannabis and the ongoing great social equity issues. It is pretty appalling. Now, we just hosted two power-packed live events, the first since February 2020 before COVID. In October, I got to open the show and announce that was more than 1,000 days before, which was in beautiful Santa Monica. And so it was thrilling to have Steve and Troy join us. We billed it as a reunion of sorts, and that was thrilling. And then we went to Miami. And this is what I'm proud of. We've created a couple of new signature events. We put institutional investors and super angels on our stage, and they said, hey, here's what we're investing in. And then we did an Ask Me Anything. Who doesn't want to ask some of these smart investors, what do I do about this or that? So that was fun. And then we had a terrific slate of companies for what we're calling our Planting Seeds event. So that was fun, and we repeated that in Miami. And now we're just so proud because you know what, that lifts the spirit of the audience, because it is hard to raise a financing. And it said in New York, here's 15 of us that do have dry powder, and here's what we're looking for. So that was pretty exciting. Now, we were going to do a San Diego event. We even sent out an email. And so we have decided to postpone that. And so stand by, because we are creating some new live events, but be with us for our digital webinars like today, because all of us, we want to keep learning, and there's so much to learn, and it's such a complex sector. So please join us both online, and then we'll keep you posted on some upcoming live events this year. And we're going to ask you about that in a poll we're going to do in a little bit, because we want to know, where do you want to meet us in person? So we're planning to do more and more, bringing you thought leaders. These two events I just mentioned were so great. And in the investment category, you know, in our collective fund, we have made 20 investments. We're looking for a few more. If you have a fabulous company you want us to review, ideally with some revenue, we want to hear from you. And you'll see my email in the chat, because we welcome to hear from you. And we're also going to do special purpose vehicles. The short name is SPVs. And so if you're raising a financing, we'll consider that. Now, I told you we want to have revenue, but there is an exception. We are so proud that the Northeast is finally coming online. And after years and years, New York has finally adopted adult use legislation. The final guidelines are not quite out yet, and the portal is not open yet, but it will be. And we have our first justice involved applicants who are opening our first dispensary. So it's been a long time in coming. None of those people in licensed pursuit have revenue, so that's one of our exceptions. We want to see you, so feel free to reach us, and we're thrilled to do that. Now, we also have a consulting arm, and we're seeking companies in licensed pursuit to help those companies, or to help sort through your strategic needs. So let us hear from you. And also a really terrific marketing arm to serve your needs, kind of marketing in a box, so to speak. And our contacts are in the chat. So Carolyn, feel free to post our emails or our website so people can find us. Now we're putting up a little mini poll for you. Feel free to answer it now or push it to the side, whatever works for you. Also, yes, we want to hear both, what would you like as far as attend a live event as far as geography? And then you want some content, let us hear from you. Now, if you're new to this, you need to know that we are recording this. You'll be able to hear this again on our replays page. And guess what? We've done many of these for the last several years, and you can pick up a replay if you go to our website. So that URL is in the chat also. We want you to feel free to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and create a conversation with somebody if you want. And we have really a quite incredible guest today. So we want you to feel free to post questions to Michael Correa. And then we'll ask a few of those at the end of this conversation. So this is also, I want to say big thank you to our alliance partners and our sponsors. These sponsors and alliance partners are the people who have allowed us to do this kind of digital programming and live events. We are most grateful. And that includes Green Tank, who's a provisioner of innovative vape hardware, Alpha Root, a series of insurance services for cannabis businesses, PayQuick, which offers treasury services for cannabis license owners, and we are newly merging with Green Check Verify. That's a work in progress, almost finished. And SuperNet, which has created a closed loop credit card services business for cannabis dispensaries. And Markham as our sponsor, which is a premier financial services firm. Okay, to our very vibrant subject matter. I say that because this is one of my favorite subjects. I try to read everything there is to know, to understand what is going on, and to be blunt about it, what the hell is going on now and in DC, especially with the little changeover in Congress and the advocates and evangelists who were there. So I also want you to meet one of my favorite people and experts on the subject, the legislative expert on the Hill. Come on, welcome to our stage, Michael Correa, who is the government relations expert for NCIA, which is our wonderful cannabis trade association. So Michael, I welcome you, and give our listeners, our audience, your deeper background so we can appreciate you even more.
Oh, thanks, Gene. You're like one of my #1 cheerleaders. I really appreciate it. It was nice seeing you in Miami, and my one of my first events was the Arcview event back 10 years ago, and so I've been there almost from day one. So really appreciate everything you guys have been doing over the years, and always willing to help out whenever you guys ask. I'm Michael Correa, Director of Government Relations for the National Cannabis Industry Association. We're a trade association in the cannabis industry. We're the oldest, the largest, and the most diverse trade association out there. We were doing it before everyone else. There are multiple trade associations going on now, which is wonderful. More resources going for the lobbying effort, which I appreciate, hitting on all the issues that need to be hit on. I have been doing this for 9 years. And I was lobbying on the cannabis issue before there were legal sales in Colorado and in Washington State. And I was an island unto myself in DC trying to lobby about the cannabis industry. And it's like, you represent who? You represent what? What's the issue? And to have to work with the cannabis industry, to have a professional face of the cannabis industry, to do for the cannabis industry what every other industry in America has. I just wanted to be there. I wanted to increase the visibility. I wanted to increase the professionalism, add a suit and tie to the cannabis industry, and just to represent the cannabis industry. And it's been so exciting. It's been so fun. Of course, it's been so frustrating watching Congress act on some of these issues. 9 years ago, I thought we'd have legalization by now. Here we are 9 years later, and I'm still talking about incremental reform just to show you how slow things go. So, and before that, I worked on Capitol Hill, so I've been in politics for almost 30 years now. an old guy, and so I've been around. I love it. I love the issue. Love being able to talk about cannabis whenever I can, and just looking forward to a good discussion today.
Wow, thank you for being so tireless and such an advocate for us in our industry. So, Michael, I am so upset we couldn't get safe passed. I learned from you because I had the pleasure of attending and being part of 2 of your lobby days. And you were the trainer. You taught us 2 things that remain for me. And maybe this will help others to hear this. One, you said you showed us because we got to call on staffers. I think you created over 250 meetings with congressional staffers and Senate staffers that you said, hey, they don't understand this stuff. Sure, Nadler, Schumer, Booker, they understand it clearly, and certainly others, but most don't understand even what safe banking is. And we were single-minded focus. We didn't go in talking about anything else. So you taught us that. They don't understand, so you have to lay out what are the key issues. And another thing you taught us, which stays with me, it's not top of mind. Our
Yeah.
industry is not top of mind. I get it. They're worried about Ukraine. They're worried about immigration. They're worried about so many things. Cannabis isn't ranking high. So that gives me a little patience, but I'm mad as hell. Michael, help us. Why didn't it pass, and will it pass? Give us some insight there.
Well, and thank you for the little quick background and coming out to lobby days. That's one of the most enjoyable times of the year when all of our members come out to lobby Congress. But I one of the things I've tried to do is let people in advocacy in the cannabis industry know what needs to get done to be successful in politics, and for politicians in DC to know here's the cannabis industry. This is what they stand for. This is what they represent, and just mixing those two together. And it's been eye-opening for a lot of people because they don't understand politics. And the fact that we're doing a cannabis webinar, most people understand cannabis, it's a priority for them, but they don't understand that from a politician standpoint. And I joke this may be the 101st on their top 100 list in DC that they want to work on, and just put it into perspective. And why should a member rally around cannabis? What's in their self-interest to do this? Does it help their reelection? Does it help their campaign? Is their state going to legalize? There has to be a self-interested way, and to be able to have people understand that, it gets into the mind of the politician. They're able to be better lobbyists and advocates on this issue. Now, on that issue, you said, you mentioned Nadler and Schumer and others. I don't know if they understand this as well as they should. It's very frustrating. Nothing has frustrated me more at the end of last year and the past year or two than watching the whole discussion around the Safe Banking Act play out. And like I mentioned, I worked on Capitol Hill for 15 years, and in this on safe banking, there are very few issues where you have such a broad range of stakeholders who are supporting something. It was truly wonderful. The advocates, the industry, different groups were around it. It was really a wonderful group. 9 years ago, when we talked about the Safe Banking Act, the logic was, in a Republican Congress, what can Congress do in 2013, 2014, 2015 that allowed the cannabis industry to go forward and work in states that were legalizing before Congress ever legalized cannabis at the federal level? Banking was one of those issues. Well, I had expected banking would have passed years ago and we would talk about legalization now. The discussion changed. Now going into 19, 20, 21, 22, not only was it safe, why safe was needed, but legalization was needed. We had to address all the issues around cannabis, around the arrest, around expungement, around the diverse industry, around participation. There are a lot of issues that needed to get addressed, but that wasn't the sole purpose of SAFE 9 years ago and 8 years ago and 7 years ago. And the discussion has changed. And so who was stopping SAFE? It wasn't cannabis prohibitionists. It was our friends in advocacy, because they didn't feel like SAFE went far enough, hey, listen, we want SAFE to go farther. We want to address all the issues. That's what I'm fighting for. But I'm also realistic to know where the votes and where are the votes in Congress that can get something done. And the votes were on safe and not a lot more. And that's something we should have been willing to accept and gone forward on. Now, if you were to ask me how not to do this, I would have done it exactly how Chuck Schumer did it. If Chuck Schumer really wanted safe banking passed, in January of 2021, he would have said cannabis reform is a priority, safe banking is a priority, and we're going to get these done. And he would have gotten it done. He would have worked with stakeholders. He would have worked with Republicans and Democrats to get it over the finish line. He wouldn't have spent 18 months talking about his bill and trashing the Safe Banking Act in that amount of time, taking all the oxygen out of the room. So by the time he finally pivoted to safe banking, which is around October, November, and December of this last year, they ran out of room. They ran out of time. They did not have enough time to get something done. That was one big issue. Strategically, I think they made a mistake. And the second thing is there was a whole issue of what would be included in language. It was called safe banking. It was called Safe Plus. What would be included? Would you include something around expungement? Would you include something around research? What were the issues you would include? No one ever saw that. There was never a language that I saw. It was always a theoretical, people talked about it. So the industry was lobbying for one issue, and then you would hear, well, this provision's added. Well, this provision's added, and this provision's added. And none of it was ever added. There was never a bill or language we could rally around to say, Senator, are you willing to support this? Because no one knew what the language was. And so we were really close to a deal in early December, and it all blew up because stuff was getting added at the last second. It was an issue of I think there were too many cooks in the kitchen. We didn't rally around just one theme, which was safe plus expungement, or maybe a little more. They were talking about guns. They were talking about this. Well, in the Senate, you need 60 votes to get something done. If you add a provision here, you may lose a senator here. You may gain a senator there. It's all the math. It's all 60. And instead of going to the Republicans and say, what are you willing to accept with your 10 senators? Let's get this done. The discussion, it went off on a tangent. They couldn't agree on language. And the year ended, they ran out of time and they couldn't get it done. Now, as frustrating as that is, and as much as I want to give up on SAFE, I'm not giving up on SAFE. When I've been talking to people on the Hill, there's an appetite to redo SAFE, to do it right, to spend the time to get it done, and to work on that. And so that's something I'm working on now. It's not a priority in the next week or month or something, but it's something they want to get to. Congress it's a brand new Congress. We have 80 new freshman members in the House. A lot of new, we have new leadership. Kevin McCarthy is the new speaker. We have a lot of turmoil. They're organizing their committees. It's going to take some time, but there is an appetite on Capitol Hill to revisit SAFE and to look at SAFE and get back to it. It's just, we need to learn the lessons of how not to do something and pivot and do something right. And I'm doing my best as I can as a lobbyist to get the industry unified and to be able to have one ask of what we should ask in SAFE and SAFE Plus, and just work on the votes. If the votes aren't there, your provision shouldn't be in. And so that was a big long-winded sort of discussion on SAFE of how the year ended and how we can pivot and have a successful year coming up.
You know, I like your focus because that's what you did for us on Lobby Day over SAFE. You taught us we're just going to talk SAFE. What are the issues? Here they are. You taught us the issues. And I think that is critical work that you're doing. And I also like what you said, you're trying to align the other associations or players to have this one.
And on that note, you know, there are multiple trade associations around cannabis, and we agree on 95% of the issues, which we all work together. It's great. I'm happy. But there are individual cannabis companies that have their own lobby firms, and individual companies may want particular issues or for ego reasons or other reasons. And there's a lot of conversations happening at the same time. And when I would go back, you know, I've been doing a lot of meetings on the House and Senate in the past 2 weeks. And I was talking about what happened with SAFE, how did it play out? And there were a lot of side conversations going on. Someone said this, but there was never any coordination going on rallying around safe. There were a lot of mixed messages. I hope that isn't repeated. And I want to be honest. We want to solve the problems of the war on drugs. We want to end the war on drugs. We want to
Yeah.
deschedule cannabis. We want a diverse, inclusive industry that helps small businesses. We want records expunged. We want all this. But at the same time, we have to be realistic of what Congress is willing to do, and what Congress is willing to do. That's what we have to be willing to accept. And if that's incremental, that's incremental. And if it's research, or if it's safe, or if it's something else, we need to accept that as advocates who want this, to know that we can, as long as we're moving the chains, we can go, and next year we can come back, and next year, and it keeps growing versus going backwards. And I just don't like the whole, we're either going to solve all this in one bill or we're getting nothing. That's not the way to do anything,
Yes.
because no one benefits from that. And you saw what happened when SAFE didn't pass. There's just this pullback of, this deflating of the industry. Like, okay, we gave it a shot, we didn't, and now people are pivoting. And you see, I think, the economic ramifications of that. And if you don't have a strong cannabis industry, there's not going to be money to do advocacy, and you're not going to get the issues that you really
Sure. Sure, as you said, the whole capital markets decline partly turned on that sentiment. Is something happening positive for industry or not? All right, let's talk about the next fun issue, Juicy, and that's about scheduling. Now, you know this, and I know this because I'm really a nerd on all these issues. I really enjoy reading and staying up with it. But notice, everyone, when scheduling came up for Biden this past year, he did not say rescheduling. He did not say descheduling. He used the word scheduling. So what does your crystal ball say about what's going to happen there? What do you think? I've heard all the rumors. What are both your rumors and what could be reality there?
Well, I mean, a rumor could be a reschedule. There is what NCIA believes in. Excuse me, I have a plugged nose. I think everyone in America is a little under the weather, and I've been, so if I cough, apologies. NCIA's official position is we want to deschedule cannabis, not reschedule cannabis. The banking issue, the 280E tax issue, is related to scheduling, the way it's regulated. And our view is deschedule it, treat it like alcohol, regulate at the state levels. We have a regulatory system. We did a policy paper years ago, and I will post that up in the chat area so people can see that, of what we think regulation should look like. Now, from a conspiracy standpoint, has Big Pharma gotten to the president? Have people talked about rescheduling, looking at it as a drug? NCIA, and I don't think the industry would accept any of that, and I don't think America would accept that. The last thing America wants is this plant rescheduled as a drug by itself, where we can't have access to it, because the illicit market will never go away. We need to have this product descheduled, legal, to where we can use it as an intoxicant, we can use it as a drug, we can use it as a skincare product. There are different uses, and cannabis is so wonderful. Unlike alcohol or other issues, there are many uses of this that we're just figuring out now, and it's going to be not a simple regulatory system. It's going to be a very complex regulatory system. And with that, I'll find our paper, and then I'll put it up there for everyone to see.
Right. That's great. Now, also, I've read that there's this potential specialty schedule, Schedule 6, go figure. We all know, because we try to solve for 280E issues, that would go away, that quirky, terrible ruling. We'll talk about that in a minute, on Schedule 3. But what the heck, Schedule 6?
So, the 280 tax issue is specific to Schedule 1 or Schedule 2. So if you were to schedule, say, to Schedule 3, 280E wouldn't apply. And there was a lot of discussion years ago. A lot of politicians wanted to facilitate more research, and they thought the roadblock to research was its scheduling. And if they only scheduled to Schedule 2, we could access research. That's not the case. We pushed back on that over the years. Some legislation that worked its way through Capitol Hill talked about Schedule 2. We were opposed to it. you don't really see people who know anything about cannabis talk about Schedule 2. And so it's usually someone who's outdated or uninformed around cannabis that just says, oh, let's reschedule to Schedule 2. It's not going to happen. Now, could you reschedule? Could you create a new schedule for cannabis? I mean, I'm open to it. There is a group out there, I think they're called Schedule 6, that talk about creating their own scheduling for just cannabis. It's been mentioned on the Hill once or twice over the years, but it's not something to where more than just a person or two knows about it. It's more than just a novelty. I think the biggest issue is going to be how we legalize at the federal level and what it looks like. Do you delist it? Do you legalize it in 50 states? Do you give 50 states the ability to opt out and go slow and slow play it? There's different approaches. But I put up our paper. If people want to look at that, there's options on what we think legalization should look like. And that's going to be the biggest issue. But in Congress right now, most of the bills that you see deal with descheduling. The MORE Act, the SRC, the Schumer bill, they're all about rescheduling or descheduling. We're not on to the rescheduling now. What Biden does and what Biden directs or asks his administration could be different, but I'm not having those conversations right now. And I think you would see the industry unified and pushing back on something like that, and especially advocates.
What about some of those bills you just mentioned? Are those going to stay alive, or do they get thrown out and new ones come? Are the sponsors changing and all that?
So every Congress, you have to start from scratch, and so you can just take last Congress's bill and just reintroduce it. The only thing that's going to change is the number. We have been talking to a lot of offices. Yes, everyone wants to reintroduce their bills. There is a talk about SAFE and reintroducing SAFE, but some of the strategies around SAFE is, should the Senate and House already work out a deal to where they agree on language instead of having one chamber do it and then worry about the other chamber? Work out a deal ahead of time, have language you can agree on, and then one chamber passes and the other chamber passes. That's a strategy that they're thinking now. Nancy Mace, a congresswoman from South Carolina, has her bill, the States Reform Act. She's looking, I think, to reintroduce that. There's another Republican congressman out there who's probably going to be working on a legalization bill that may drop. The MORE Act, and here's the thing, from what I've heard, the advocates want to reintroduce the MORE Act again, but now we're in a Republican Congress, and if about a bill like the MORE Act, Democratic sponsored, probably won't get hearings, probably won't get marked up, it won't move. So in reality, it will be out there. But if bills were to get hearings, because Republicans are Republicans, they want to talk about their bills and nothing has changed. We've been talking to offices. There are incremental bills out there that deal with research, clarifying research, and some issues around veterans that will probably get dropped in the next couple of weeks. But these are small incremental bills. And as I mentioned before, NCIA is supportive of the broader cause. Anything that moves the chains on cannabis reform, we're supportive of. And if that's clarifying and helping research and opening up research, we want to do it. The research bill that passed last Congress, if you guys know your history, the only way you can get research quality cannabis is through the University of Mississippi. There's only one source of cannabis in the country. It's at the University of Mississippi. And from what I've heard, it's really of poor quality. And from a research standpoint, it makes researching very hard. They are trying to clarify the bill to maybe open it up to having state cannabis available. So instead of having one source, you had multiple sources, which would improve the quality of cannabis, which would make research a little easier. Opening it up to research, researching on the issue is possible, whether it's working around veterans, whether it's just the tax issue, the 280E tax issue. Nancy Mace reintroduced that tax bill. It used to be an Earl Blumenauer bill. It was a very limited bill. It just talks about the tax code to where cannabis businesses can write off on their federal tax returns standard business deductions. It's simple. It's a simple policy issue, but it's a very complex, nuanced issue for politicians to get their hands around. It's been around for years, but most of the 280E issue will probably get addressed in legalization bills. And so there hasn't been the priority to focus on a 280E bill. But if you know this better than anyone, Gene, like 280E just hammers on these businesses and crushes them, and it's really hard to make money at the end of the day. And if you were to probably ask any cannabis business what's the most important thing they want, that would be 280E resolution, because that hits their bottom line. They'll be able to expand, they'll be able to grow, hire more employees. Safe is easy, safe is a simple lift. It's easier, it'll make life easier, but their true bottom line, 280E is the issue. It's just a more complex issue that's harder for a lobbyist to actualize.
Really disappointing. All right, let's have fun with another juicy issue, and that's around interstate commerce. Now, to prepare for today, I went back to the Vanderbilt tome. It's a multi-page review of the issues around interstate, which are many. So my question to you is really, do the feds even have jurisdiction or care about this? Isn't this a states' rights issue? And what do you think's real or fantasy on the ability to ship product between different states that make their own rules and laws and legislation to do that?
So I don't pretend to be a interstate commerce lawyer or an expert on this, but I know just enough to be dangerous. And I know if cannabis were to be legalized and be like any other commodity out there, like tomatoes, like oranges, well, interstate commerce is supreme. The Interstate Commerce Act, like, it would allow the free flow of commerce. So I don't think a state could cut off trade with that border, because they can't do it with nuts, they can't do it with tomatoes, they can't do it with other products. So simply looking at it, if legalization happened, you would have interstate commerce soon following after that. But I do believe that Congress has the power to write into legislation changes to that. So they could make exceptions. And that is one thing people need to think about. You could have 50 different regulatory structures and 50 different prices and 50 different commodities in states that weren't able to move between states. And that would create a disequilibrium. You would have, I mean, there's a reason why we get oranges and orange juice from Florida, because they're better at growing oranges there. And so I don't think cannabis would be different. Would you grow cannabis in, say, Minnesota or Maine if you could grow it cheaper in California or somewhere else? And that's something that has to get worked out. But with that being said, you have cannabis businesses right now who are making tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in a regulatory structure that's based on state sales. And you can't pull that rug out from underneath them and take their investment away tomorrow. And that's something, if you did, they wouldn't be investing in cannabis, because no company would make an investment in a business that they knew was going to be ending, soon after. And that's something we have to reconcile, of the investments in cannabis, and how do we, is there a runway? Is there a landing strip? Do we extend it out 2, 3, 5 years on something before interstate commerce kicks in? Because this is a business decision. You haven't had true economics apply to the cannabis industry yet. Supply and demand, regular economics in cannabis, and that's something that has to get worked out with legalization. And trust me, I don't own a cannabis business, but if I did, it's something you're thinking about. What effect would interstate commerce have on you in, the year after, 2 years down the road? And the last thing you would want to do is support something that led to your own demise. And we have to, as policy people, be thinking about that. I'm cognizant of it, and when I talk to policymakers in DC, I talk about that issue. And we've done a webinar on it. There's policy papers on there. There's a lot of information out there for people to go through and work out. But it is a complex policy issue that I know enough that it's going to be out there that can divide the industry as we go towards legalization.
It is fascinating. You can see that California and Oregon have made some agreements that that's what they want to do. But then if California or Oregon wants to ship their product to New York, that introduces all kinds of other issues. So it is complicated. I think it's fascinating, certainly. All right, now let's talk about the FDA. There is no doubt that Delta 8, as well as intoxicating hemp products, are out there in big time in the market. What's your view? Is the FDA going to rule on those? When might that happen? What do you think about all that?
So, I mean, the FDA just came out today. What was it last night today? And they made a
Yeah,
statement. Today's the 26th, right?
yeah,
Here, let me post it up here for everyone to see.
I saw that.
And it talks about um, CBD and the fact that they don't have the power. And I'll read off their the first. After careful review, concluded that a new regulatory pathway for CBD is needed that balances individual desires to access CBD with regulatory oversight needed to manage risk. And so they're basically saying they can't do anything around CBD right now. It's either they think they can't do something or they don't want to do something, and they're prepared to work with Congress on this matter. This gets back to why we need regulations, why we need clarity. And if you go back to our paper, we talk about that. I don't think on cannabis it's a one size fits all on regulatory reform. Our paper talks about the end use of cannabis. Are you using it as a skincare product, low THC? Is it a pharma drug? Is it an intoxicant? There are different ways, and depending on what your end use is, that depends who the regulatory agency should be. Delta 8 to me is an unintended consequence of the science getting in front of the regulations and a gray market area when the Farm Bill passed around hemp, which was 5 years ago? Yeah, I think 5 years ago. They weren't. No one was talking about Delta 8. They didn't know because it wasn't out there. It was something that happened, and they weren't prepared for it. And I think the states are dealing with this now. And I think some states are regulating it out and cutting it and regulating it out of existence. It's something to where if you don't do regulations, this is what happened. This is why you need clear and clean regulations around this product. Government agencies, regulatory agencies, they don't just shrug their shoulder. They need to get directed from Congress. This product, this is how you use it. This is what it's used for. This is how you regulate it. And so I understand where they're coming from. I'm sure they have the power to do something, but it gets back to we need Congress to step up and write this. This is a reason why Congress. These are big policy issues that are affecting millions of people. Congress needs to jump in and stop holding their head in the sand and have a discussion around this issue.
Oh boy, I have to say, you scared me back on that one. I'm so disappointed to hear that because you're saying they're kind of kicking the issues to Congress.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing anything that happened out of Congress that we wanted, especially safe. So,
So, I
wow,
mean, the
that's
quote on the paper,
disappointing.
it says these citizen petitions ask the agency to conduct rulemaking, and they said they're not going to do that. And so they're basically saying we're not going to do anything around this issue, which is really frustrating. And listen, when you say you're going to go to Congress to get something done, think about how long that could take and how the question marks around CBD Delta 8 are just going to linger out there until this issue gets addressed. And it's really frustrating from a product standpoint, from a consumer standpoint, and
Yeah.
just from a business operations
Yeah,
standpoint.
business operating, certainly. There's plenty of CBD makers who are selling product, both good and bad. Some are harmful, and it'd be great to have direction. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you've touched on federal legalization even in this conversation, but let's go back to that. I have absolutely made a fool out of myself by predicting, just like you said, 9 years ago, you thought we'd have it by now. I
Yeah.
certainly did. I've spoken from many stages thinking it would be here. I I know this sounds so negative, but I've kind of given up on it. And in fact, when I'm in meetings with companies, I won't even let them get away with saying, oh, when legalization happens, because we do have 38 states that have taken their own action. What do you think? Who's stopping it? Is it Big Pharma in their lobbying? They're going to play, but they don't want to play yet. Who is slowing down this progress?
Well, I don't think, I mean, I don't know if anyone's slowing it down outside of the fact that this has been illegal for what, 50, 60 years, and
More than that.
it has just been demonized for generations. Getting past that, I'll be honest with you, I don't think advocates and industry are as harmonized around this issue as they should be. Advocates want to, like I said, they want to solve every issue around the drug war, around arrests, around expungement, around everything. And we as an industry are supportive of it, but we have to be realistic. We have to go to Congress and how I think if advocates in the industry were more harmonized on their message, SAFE would have passed because that gave Cory Booker and Chuck Schumer just enough question marks to not want to go forward. If advocates had been pushing, we want SAFE, it would have happened. So we can't even agree on the message. You and I can agree on the need for SAFE, and you and I can agree on 280 and these other things. But as far as people who are knocking on the doors of Capitol Hill and giving Congress members money and working on their campaigns and getting people to turn out to vote, you know, sometimes the activists have the ear of certain members. And we need to rally around what the industry wants. And that's something I'm trying to work on with the trade associations. It would be wonderful if there were 3 or 4 issues that we could agree on to where at least the industry was unified and to where there wasn't a mixed message. Congress members, Congress loves home runs. They love slam dunks. They don't love issues that are going to divide um, their voters. And they want to make sure, like Chuck Schumer sitting there going, I don't want to get crucified if I pass SAFE by my activist advocates. And so that's something we have to work on. But, you know, I mean, I can use. I'm not a cannabis business operator, and it's up to the businesses to just be active and work with NCIA, work with trade associations, get engaged. Because if not, nothing's going to happen. I am a lobbyist. I can't give up hope. If I'm giving up hope, why am I doing my job? So I have to keep up the good work. I was really frustrated. I wanted to give up on SAFE. I'm telling you, on New Year's Eve, I'm like, I'm done with SAFE. It's time to move on to something else. But I've rechanged my thoughts, and I think we can still focus on it. Just focus on the discussion. And the biggest issue I want to do in a Republican House and Democratic Senate, what can we get done? And whatever we can get done, let's get that done and be happy and move the chains for eventual more reform.
Well, speaking of that, you know, you mentioned Nancy Mace earlier. Who are some of the other Republican sponsors? We've had David Joyce online, and I've spoke with him in person. He's certainly an advocate. He's from Ohio, right, as I recall. Who are some other Republican sponsors that maybe we can count on and look to for progress here?
So Dave Joyce is great. He's been doing it for years. Tom McClintock of California has been doing this. Brian Mast of Florida is a Republican cannabis caucus co-chair. A Republican took over for Don Young, who passed away. He was a member from Alaska who passed away this past year. Nancy Mace is a Republican. There are a lot of freshman members. I think 80 freshman members. I'm going to go through and start finding Republicans who could be good on this issue. They are a couple other Republicans who are insurrectionists, and I'm not going to deal with insurrectionists, not to get political on this discussion, but I care about democracy and cannabis, and they're not mutually exclusive, and I want to make sure I'm not going to be prioritizing a member of Congress whose just beliefs I can't agree with. So those are the 4 big Republicans. But that's the issue. You need more than 4. We're going to need 25. We're going to need 50. We're going to need to grow that on the Republican side. This should not be a partisan issue. Republicans should be embracing this in their states because the voters are. It's just politically, they're not as engaged and evolved around this issue. And that's something we have to work on. And it's been taking years.
Yeah, it's one of the few issues that does poll bipartisan. So that's why it was shocking to me to not get anything done this past year, but I remain an optimist. I don't talk about federal legislation, legalization anymore, as I just shared. I do believe SAFE has to happen, must happen, and
Yeah.
hoping for 280E relief. Now, despite all that, what's happening? It's 5 years from now. What does it look like? Do we actually have a nationwide market? Do we have a thriving medical market still? Or what happens with that? Do we get our prescriptions in the pharmacy? What
Yeah,
should
so
be?
I think in a Republican House, you have to temper expectations on cannabis reform, but it doesn't mean you can't do incremental reform. So there are a couple pieces of incremental reform, whether it's around research, whether it's around vets, whether it's around safe, that I think are totally doable in this Congress. But when you talk about descheduling, there is no way a descheduling bill is going to get out of a Republican House of Representatives. So
uh,
we can forget that. So that leads to, a couple years down, the 2024 election, what happens. But, the president of the United States has said he wants to talk about this issue. You mentioned his exact quote, whether it's deschedule, delist, what is it? But he's having, for his administration and for the agencies to study this issue. So that's never happened before. The president's never directed his agencies to start that process. Now, do they come back and they say, well, cannabis shouldn't be legal and an end of discussion? Do they say it should be legalized, but look at this? You look at the hemp regulations, they've spent 5 years on hemp and they still have nothing. Do we think the administration in the next 18 months is going to do something around cannabis? I don't know. I mean, maybe the president has directed them to do something. So that could be another avenue. And then the last one I want to talk about is appropriations. Every Congress, they have to appropriate the government. And in that, that was one of the things we passed 9 years ago was the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment that kept the Department of Justice, the DEA, from enforcing federal laws in states where medical marijuana was legal. If we can expand those provisions to include adult use, if we can expand those provisions around veterans, VA doctors, if we can expand the provisions to allow legalization in the city of DC where I live, there are provisions around appropriations that are possible. It is something I'm not giving up on. So those are like the three big avenues of stuff that's going to keep me busy for the next 18 months.
Well, that is so interesting. Carolyn, do you have some juicy questions you can pose to Michael? Whoops, you're on mute. Carolyn, you're on mute. Oh, shoot.
Okay, great. Yes, I'll definitely jump in. I don't know that we'll be able to get to all of them, but
Oh,
there
just a
definitely are
few.
good juicy ones. So just on what you were just talking about, Michael, one question from John Sullivan is, can the president change the cannabis schedule on his or her own?
So there is a great paper, the Brookings Institution, John Hudak, who's now going to be a regulator up in Maine. He was a policy wonk in DC and wrote a great paper. And he says the president does not have the power to arbitrarily reschedule, but he can direct the administration, HHS, DOJ, those agencies to review and start the process of changing. And that's exactly what he's done. And so he doesn't have that power. For the most part, Obama said this. He said he would rather, this is such an issue, he would rather Congress address it when it comes to rescheduling. So when you reschedule drugs, the power is with Congress to do it. Congress can just change the law and they can do it easily. Or the HHS and those government agencies start the process of saying, do we think cannabis should be in Schedule 1? What are the cases? What should we move? And then they start that. But he just can't say move it and it happens.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. One, you touched on medical cannabis a little bit ago. One question that we got from Mitchell, how can medical cannabis physicians play an integral role in aligning ourselves with national efforts towards legislation and promoting education?
So I know at one time, and I think it's still current, the AMA, the American Medical Association, is opposed to cannabis, and I think that was their official policy. I did double check; it was on their website when I had recently checked. But I had spoken to a conference last year, which was a lot of the attendees were doctors, and it was about doctors and cannabis and talking about that issue. You go back to just medical school. When they're in medical school, cannabis is not something that's talked about. And so just their whole history of being a doctor, cannabis is not on the table. You have to have an open mind and you have to, read the papers and understand that. And so, one, you have to get through just the policy of will they even discuss it in medical schools? That's one thing. Will they officially change the policy where doctors can talk about it and recommend it? And then just if you're doctors and you're educated on this, that could be an issue to where you say, hey, listen, the science is there. I have patients who've been benefiting from this. And I think, Congress needs to do and then work around groups of doctors to work. I know there are nurses and other groups out there in the medical field, healthcare field that are rallying around cannabis. We just need more of that because Congress needs more stakeholders talking about an issue where they feel comfortable about this. And there are a lot of politicians out there who think cannabis is, the devil's lettuce. It's evil, it's bad. And the more doctors we can get, the more science we can get behind it to say, no, this is how it treats these illnesses and pains. It will make it easier from a policy perspective.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I've seen a number of nurses associations cropping up, like the Green Nurses one, the American Nurses Association. There's a lot of, it seems to be getting a lot of momentum from a nurses level. So it would be interesting if the doctors actually.
I see someone put in the chat, Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, dfcr.org. So there are probably some groups out there. It's just getting more stakeholders on this and getting the education out there.
Great. Okay, great. Well, I think we have time for one other that I found that I saw in the chat. This is pertaining to NCIA. What does NCIA tell Congress when they ask if the industry wants interstate commerce?
So there's two approaches. One, like I mentioned, I'm cognizant. Like we're supportive of interstate commerce because it's just economics. But I'm also cognizant of the fact there could be a lot of businesses who are not supportive of interstate commerce, who could actually lobby opposed to bills out there that does the issue no good, and to have a discussion. And so it's not a matter of, okay, yes, interstate commerce, because I think Nancy Mace's bill specifically is about interstate commerce and just allows it. And there are industry businesses out there who are not supportive of that. Is actually having a discussion. If you do this, this is what will happen. My job is not to destroy cannabis businesses. My job is to have thriving cannabis businesses and to make sure that happens and we get a good outcome we want. So the illicit market slowly dissipates and the tax and regulated market grows. And you see this in California, you see this in other states. If you create bad regulations, the illicit market doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. And you have businesses leaving California because they can't make money there. That's not what we want. We've had the illicit market for 50 years, 80 years. We don't want that. We want businesses benefiting from that. And it means we need regulations that allow these businesses to make money. And that's a big issue. So I'm not, I'm not giving a political response. It is a policy response of, I'm not making the laws. I'm lobbying on behalf of laws. And I want to give everything out there, all the options out there so these policymakers can determine that.
Thank you for that. I shared earlier that I went to lobby days for 2 years in a row under your guidance, Michael. You taught us how to handle it. It's a fascinating experience as you created over 250 meetings with staffers of Senate leaders and congressional people. And to walk around all those buildings was fascinating. And so I'll make an unabashed plea that if you want to be part of Lobby Days this year, you are going to host it, Michael, in DC again, of course, on the Hill. May, I have the dates, 16th, 17th, and 18th. And they would like, you, in a perfect world, you're a member of NCIA, so I'm encouraging membership because you know, it takes dollars to do this kind of promoting and effort. We have to support you, Michael. So
Yeah.
I want to thank you for being here today, for your very capable representative of our industry. How lucky we are to have you, for coming to Miami and speaking on our stage. To our attendees, to our alliance partners and our sponsors. And before you go, I want to remind everybody that our next webinar, online webinar, is February 9th. You can sign up at this link. So if you want to put the sign up link in there, Carolyn, do that. And so it's all about, hey, how do you raise money from friends and family? But guess what? There's other alternatives too for your business. So that'll be very vibrant. Thank you. Thanks again, Michael. And thank you everyone for joining us. Come back and go to our website to see former webinars and to join us again. Thanks so
Hey,
much.
thanks, Gene. Thanks, Arcview.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. If you have questions, I think someone posted my email up
Mhm.
there. NCIA is doing our lobby days for our members, but I like seeing people come out. It's fun. And just the fact that after 3 years, the Capitol's opened back up again. I get to wear a tie. I think I've worn 3 ties in the past 3 years. So it's good to get back. I get to be a lobbyist again. So, Gene, thanks for everyone
Love
in your
it.
team.
Thank
Just
you for your hard and diligent work, Michael. All right. Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone. Have a great day.